$320,000. That's what they spent on imported flowers and vintage wine while their grandson fought for every breath. 65,000 could have saved his life. They looked me in the eye and said no, said they needed to be prudent. But prudence didn't stop them from booking that vineyard in Napa Valley. And the cruelest part? They never even said his name again. My name is Bryn Hartwell. I'm 34 years old. And I used to be someone who believed family meant something. I served as a medical officer in the army. The kind of work where you learn to keep your hands steady even when everything around you is falling apart. I was honorably discharged on what they call a hardship separation, military language for when your child is dying. And the army lets you go home to watch it happen. Now I teach at a middle school in Fort Collins, Colorado. The pay isn't much, but it's close to the children's hospital. And after everything, proximity to hope mattered more than comfort. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment that smells faintly of cleaning solution, and the lavender candles I burn to cover up the medicinal odor that never quite left after all those months of home care. The walls are thin enough that I can hear my neighbor's television through the plaster, but it's clean, and the rent is manageable. And those are victories I've learned not to take for granted. Some mornings I stand at the kitchen window with my coffee and watch parents walk their children to the school bus stop. And I have to remind myself to breathe through the ache of it. My son Noah was 7 when we lost him. 7 years of gap-toothed smiles and questions about whether astronauts get lonely in space. He loved science kits, the kind with beakers and safety goggles that made him feel important. He loved microwave popcorn, even though half the kernels never popped and he'd crunch through them anyway, pretending they were astronaut food. And he loved those giant inflatable dinosaurs outside hardware stores, the ones that dance in the wind like they're celebrating something. Every time we drove past one, he'd press his face to the window and wave, convinced they could see him waving back. He also had a congenital heart defect. The doctors used careful words like progressive and manageable, as if softening the language could soften the reality. For years we managed. Medication, regular checkups, small procedures that bought us time. I learned to read his symptoms the way other mothers learn to read report cards, the slight blue tint around his lips. The way he'd sit down in the middle of playing, the shallow breathing that sounded like paper crinkling. In the army, I'd been trained to assess injuries quickly, to triage, to decide who could wait and who couldn't. I never thought I'd use those skills on my own child. But his heart finally outpaced what medicine could do from the outside. It needed intervention. The kind that required surgical theatres and specialists, and the sort of money that doesn't appear in savings accounts built on a teacher's salary. The cardiologist's name was Dr. Reeves. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice. The sort of doctor who'd learned that delivering devastating news required more than medical expertise, it required humanity. She sat across from me in a consultation room that smelled like antiseptic and artificial lemon, and she didn't waste time with false comfort. "Bryn," she said, her hands folded on the desk between us. "There's a surgical option available. It's not experimental, the success rate is strong, very strong. But it's specialized, and unfortunately, it's out of network for your insurance plan." I already knew what was coming. I'd spent enough nights researching, enough hours on hold with insurance representatives who apologized with voices that had been trained to sound sympathetic while delivering rejections. But hearing it confirmed felt like watching a door close in slow motion. "What's the total cost?" I asked, though I'd already seen the estimate. "Approximately $65,000, she said. She didn't blink, didn't soften it. She'd said this number before to other parents in other rooms, and she knew that honesty, however brutal, was kinder than false hope. Then she added the sentence that every doctor adds, the one that turns information into urgency. "Sooner is better, Bryn. His heart is weakening faster than we'd like." I asked all the questions that parents ask when their child's life has a price tag. Payment plans, grants, hospital charity programs, medical loans. We went through the list together, her pen moving down a sheet of resources that felt more like a formality than a solution. She knew I'd already called most of them. Some had waiting lists that stretched longer than Noah's prognosis. Others had income requirements that disqualified me. I made too much to qualify for aid, but not nearly enough to pay for surgery. "I'll find a way," I told her, though I had no idea how. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "I know you will. But don't wait too long." That night, I went home and made macaroni and cheese from a box. The kind with the powdery orange cheese that Noah loved because it didn't taste like real food, it tasted like comfort. He sat on the living room rug, building an elaborate parking lot for his toy ambulances, complete with traffic cones made from Lego pieces. He narrated the whole scene, making siren noises and inventing emergencies. "Mom," he said, looking up at me with those wide brown eyes, that always seemed too big for his small face. "Do you think you'll ever be the boss doctor again? Like when you were in the army?" The question hit me harder than it should have. "Maybe someday, sweetheart." "Would you like that?" "Yeah," he said, turning back to his ambulances. "Because boss doctors can fix anything." If only that were true, I thought. After he fell asleep that night, curled up in his bed with his worn stuffed bear tucked under one arm, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the spreadsheet I'd been avoiding. I'd labeled it options, as if calling it something neutral would make the math less devastating. I went through everything my remaining paid time off. The sick leave I'd already burned through, the small savings account I'd been building for emergencies that now felt laughably insufficient. I looked at my retirement fund and calculated the penalty for early withdrawal. I made a list of everything I could sell: my car, my furniture, the few pieces of jewelry I'd kept from my marriage before Noah's father left. No matter how I rearranged the numbers, they didn't add up to 65,000. They didn't even add up to half. That's when I did what I'd been putting off for weeks. I called my parents. Gregory and Ellen Hartwell live in a gated community on the outskirts of Denver. The kind of neighborhood where the houses look like they belong in architecture magazines, and the lawns are maintained by people whose names the residents never learn. My father built his wealth through Monroe Developments, a regional construction company that specialized in custom homes for people who measured success in square footage and marble countertops. Their house alone could have funded a small hospital wing 3 stories, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen with appliances that cost more than my car. I called on a Tuesday evening. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright and performative in the way it always was when she thought someone might be listening. "Bryn, what a lovely surprise." "Hi, Mom. I need to talk to you and Dad." "Is he there?" "Hold on, let me put you on speaker." There was a rustling sound, then my father's voice clipped and distracted. "Bryn, we're heading out to a wine tasting in about 20 minutes. Can this wait?" I closed my eyes and forced myself to speak calmly. "No, it can't. I need to see you both. It's about Noah." There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to feel like judgment. "Is he all right?" my mother asked, though her tone suggested she was asking out of obligation rather than genuine concern. "No," I said. "He's not. I'll explain when I get there. I can be there in an hour." My father sighed, the sound heavy with inconvenience. "Fine. But we really can't be late for this tasting. It's with the Hendersons, and you know how Gregory feels about punctuality." He was talking about himself in the third person again, as if he were a brand rather than a father. The drive to Denver felt longer than usual. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd frame it, how I'd keep my voice steady and my emotions in check. I told myself that this was just another negotiation, another mission briefing. But my hands kept gripping the steering wheel too tightly, and by the time I pulled into their circular driveway, my knuckles were white. Their house looked the same as always, imposing, pristine, aggressively perfect. The front door was flanked by topiaries shaped into spirals, and through the windows, I could see the glow of their chandelier, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I stood on the porch for a moment, gathering myself before I rang the doorbell. My mother opened the door wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and pearls, as if she'd dressed for a portrait rather than a conversation with her daughter. She pulled me into a brief hug, the kind that was more performance than affection, and immediately stepped back to look me over. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said, as if exhaustion were a failure of character. "I am tired," I said. She ushered me into the living room, where my father stood by the fireplace in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, checking his watch. The room smelled like expensive candles, something woodsy and masculine, probably hand-poured and labeled with a French name. "Let's make this quick," he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "What's going on with Noah?" I sat on the edge of their leather couch, which was so pristine it looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. My parents remained standing, a subtle power play I recognized from years of similar conversations. "Noah needs surgery," I said, keeping my voice even. "His heart is failing faster than the doctors expected. There's a procedure that can save him, but it's out of network. The total cost is $65,000. I let that number sit in the air for a moment before continuing. I've talked to the hospital. I've applied for every grant and charity program I can find. I've looked into medical loans, but the interest rates are predatory. And even if I qualify, I'd be paying it off for the rest of my life. I've exhausted every other option. That's why I'm here. I'm asking for help. My mother's hand went to her throat, fingers brushing against her pearls. My father's expression didn't change. He looked at me the way he'd look at a contractor presenting an over-budget proposal. "Bryn," he said slowly, "you know we've helped you before. We covered your deductibles for the last 2 procedures. We gave you the down payment when you moved back to Colorado. At some point, you need to be realistic about your financial situation." "This is realistic," I said, my voice tightening despite my efforts to stay calm. "This is a specific procedure with a specific cost and a specific timeline. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a loan. I'll pay you back. You can charge interest. You can put a lien on my car, on anything I own. I'll sign whatever you want." My mother sat down beside me, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she was settling into a negotiation. "Honey, have you called the insurance company again? Sometimes if you push hard enough, they make exceptions." "I've called them 6 times, I said. "I've spoken to 3 managers and a woman whose actual job title is exceptions specialist." The exception was no. My father crossed his arms, his posture shifting into what I'd come to recognize as his boardroom stance, knees slightly bent, weight distributed evenly, the physical embodiment of immovability. "Bryn, we can't drain our retirement accounts. We're getting older. We have to think about our own security. And we've already made financial commitments for the year." There it was. The word I'd been waiting for, commitments. "You mean Sophie's wedding?" I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. My mother's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, smoothing her expression back into something pleasant and reasonable. "It's not just a party, Bryn. It's a celebration of family. Sophie's getting married, and we want to give her the wedding she deserves." "Which family?" I asked. "Because the family I'm part of could use some celebration at the children's hospital." "That's not fair," my father said sharply. "Fair?" I repeated. "You want to talk about fair? My son is dying, and you're worried about whether the napkins match the tablecloths. You can't compare expenses like that," he said, his voice rising slightly. "A wedding venue requires a non-refundable deposit. The band is under contract. The flights are already booked. These aren't things we can just cancel." "So there is money," I said. "It's just already allocated to champagne and string lights." My mother stood up, her hands smoothing down her blouse in a gesture that looked like an attempt to smooth over the conversation itself. "Bryn, you're being emotional. This is Sophie's only wedding. She's been planning this for months. You can't expect us to—" "It's Noah's only heart," I interrupted. "He doesn't get a second chance. He doesn't get a do-over." The silence that followed was thick and ugly. My father cleared his throat and checked his watch again, as if time itself could rescue him from this conversation. "We can't give you $65,000, he said finally, "but we can refer you to a financial advisor. There are medical loan companies that specialize in situations like this." "I've already talked to them," I said. "They're offering 30% APR. I'd be paying it off until Noah's old enough to have his own children." "That's unfortunate," my father said, and the word hung in the air like an insult. "But we have to be prudent. You understand prudence, don't you? You were in the army. Duty, discipline, selfless service, those are your values too." I stared at him, this man who'd taught me to balance a checkbook and negotiate contracts, who'd told me that integrity was the foundation of success. "Selfless service," I repeated. "That's exactly what I did, for years. And now I'm asking my family to show me the same." He spread his hands in a gesture that was meant to look helpless, but came across as dismissive. "We're not made of money, Bryn." I almost laughed. The man standing in a house worth over $1 million, wearing a watch that cost more than Noah's monthly medication, was telling me he wasn't made of money. My mother tried one more time, her voice taking on that saccharine tone she used when she wanted to redirect a conversation. "Why don't you stay for dinner? Sophie and Derek are stopping by after their tasting. You could congratulate them. The venue they chose is beautiful. It's in Napa Valley. Very elegant." I stood up, my legs shaky but my voice steady. "I can't stay. Noah has a physical therapy appointment in the morning." It was true, but it was also an escape route. I couldn't sit at their dinner table and pretend everything was fine while my son's heart was failing. At the door, my mother hugged me again, her perfume overwhelming and cloying. "We'll be praying for you," she said. "Great," I said. Maybe pray for in-network coverage while you're at it. I drove home through the dark, counting exits and breathing through the rage that threatened to spill over. I'd gone there hoping for help, and I'd left with nothing but a referral to a loan shark and a reminder that family priorities were measured in dollar signs. When I got back to my apartment, Noah was asleep, his small chest rising and falling with the shallow breaths that had become his normal. I sat beside his bed and watched him, this boy who believed in dinosaurs and rocket ships and mothers who could fix anything. I'd promised him we'd figure it out. But for the first time, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. And somewhere across the city, my parents were probably raising glasses at a wine tasting, laughing about tannins and bouquets, while their grandson's heart counted down the days it had left. The next morning, Noah woke up pale and chatty, which was always his tell. When he was scared, he filled the silence with words, as if talking could keep the bad things at bay. "Mom, if I have the surgery, can I have a popsicle after?" he asked in the car, his voice small but hopeful. "You can have two," I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Different colors at the same time?" "We'll test the limits of medical science," I said, and he grinned. That gap-toothed smile that made my chest ache with love and fear in equal measure. The physical therapist was gentle with him, guiding him through exercises that were supposed to strengthen his body for surgery. Surgery we still couldn't afford. She gave him a sticker at the end and gave me a look I'd seen too many times. The look of someone who wished they could write a check but knew they couldn't. That week I started a crowdfunding page. I'd resisted it for months, hating the idea of asking strangers for help. But pride wasn't going to save my son. I wrote the description late at night, trying to find the balance between honesty and desperation. I uploaded a photo of Noah smiling in his hospital bed, giving a thumbs up to the camera. Within 24 hours, donations started coming in. $50 from a former army colleague, 20 from a stranger with a cartoon avatar, 100 from a co-worker who wrote, "For the little guy." By the end of the week, we'd raised $12,000. It was more than I'd dared to hope for, but it wasn't even close to what we needed. Then my phone rang. Sophie. I'd been avoiding her calls, but something made me answer this time, maybe exhaustion. Maybe the faint hope that she'd heard what was happening and wanted to help. "Bryn!" Her voice was bright, breathless. "You won't believe it! Derek proposed. We're engaged!" I looked at the hospital bills spread across my kitchen table and felt something crack inside me. "Congratulations," I managed. "I know, right? And Mom and Dad are being so amazing. They said there's no budget limit. Can you imagine? We're thinking destination wedding, maybe Napa Valley. Oh my God, the photos are going to be incredible. No budget limit." The words echoed in my head like a taunt. "That sounds nice," I said. "It's going to be magical," she continued, oblivious to my tone. "They said I deserve the best day of my life. And guess what? You're going to be a bridesmaid. Mom said the dresses are about $300 each, but they're gorgeous navy silk, super flattering. $300? That was nearly 2 weeks of Noah's medication. I'll have to think about it," I said. "Don't take too long," she said cheerfully. "The designer gets booked months ahead." After she hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the phone in my hand. My sister was getting a wedding with no budget limit while my son was running out of time. And somehow in my parents' calculation that made sense. I opened her Instagram later that night, unable to stop myself from looking. She'd already posted a photo of her engagement ring with the caption, "Forever starts now." My parents had commented with heart emojis and champagne glasses. My mother wrote, "So proud of our girl." I closed the app before I could do something I'd regret. Over the next 2 months, Sophie's wedding consumed my family's attention like a wildfire. There were group chats about flower arrangements, email chains about menu tastings, Pinterest boards filled with centerpiece options. Every message came with a price tag that made my stomach turn. I stopped opening them after a while. I couldn't afford to read about $10,000 floral installations when I was selling my furniture to pay for Noah's prescriptions. I sold my car and bought a 15-year-old sedan that rattled like it was laughing at my desperation. I sold my wedding ring at a pawn shop, though it had long since stopped meaning anything Noah's father had left when the medical bills started piling up, unable to handle the reality of a sick child. The pawn shop owner tried to lowball me. I told him I'd stitched up soldiers in worse condition for less than he was offering. He paid full price. I kept teaching, standing in front of 30 middle schoolers and explaining photosynthesis while my own child couldn't walk across a room without gasping. I stayed late most nights, grading papers because it was easier than going home to an apartment that smelled like hospital antiseptic and broken promises. In September, my parents invited me to dinner. To catch up, my mother said, as if we were old friends who'd lost touch rather than family members navigating a crisis. I went, though every instinct told me not to. Their house looked even larger than I remembered. Or maybe my world had just shrunk. The table was set with china that probably cost more than Noah's monthly medication. Sophie was there, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from never having to worry about money. "Bryn," she said, pulling me into a hug, "wait until you hear about the venue. We booked it. It's in Napa Valley and it's incredible. Do you know what they charge per head? You die." "Let's hope not," I said before I could stop myself. She laughed like it was a joke. "My father didn't." "That's not funny," he said. "No," I agreed. "It really isn't." My mother redirected the conversation to wine pairings and table linens, and for the next hour, I sat there mentally converting every price they mentioned into doses of medication. Therapy sessions, doctor's visits. By the time dinner ended, I'd calculated that the cost of their floral centerpieces alone could have covered a month of Noah's care. When I stood to leave, my father put his hand on my shoulder. "We're really proud of you, Bryn. You're handling everything so well. You've really matured." I looked at him, this man who'd taught me about responsibility and integrity, and felt nothing but a cold, clarifying distance. "Yeah," I said quietly. I didn't have much choice. In the car, I realized I'd stopped crying about it weeks ago. The pain had transformed into something sharper and more focused, the kind of clarity that comes right before decisive action. By October, Noah's condition had deteriorated to the point where he couldn't walk more than a few steps without his lips turning blue. The cardiologist's voice grew quieter every time we met, as if speaking softly could soften the reality. I maxed out another credit card, started tutoring at night, learned which payday lenders would approve me and which would turn me away. And then one evening, the call I'd been dreading came. "Bryn," Dr. Reeves said, her voice heavy with the weight of words she'd been trained to deliver but never got used to saying. "The medication isn't holding any more. His heart is failing faster than we expected. Without surgery, I'd estimate maybe a few weeks. How long until we're out of the window for surgery entirely?" I asked, my voice steady through years of military discipline. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Then I called the hospital billing office one more time and asked if there was any possibility, any program, any miracle they could pull from their bureaucracy. The woman on the other end sighed. "I'm sorry. We've already reviewed your case. The charity board couldn't approve it. Which quarter am I supposed to wait until?" I asked. She didn't have an answer. That night, I received a text from my mother. A photo of Sophie's dress fitting, all lace and tulle and dreams made tangible through money. The caption read, "Our beautiful girl, so blessed." I stared at that message for a long time. Blessed. They felt blessed to spend a fortune on a party while their grandson died 3 hours away. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and started documenting everything, every conversation, every text message, every receipt, every medical bill. I created a folder and labeled it Operation Ledger, though I wasn't sure yet what I planned to do with it. All I knew was that someday someone would need to know what happened. Someday, the truth would matter. 2 weeks later, I was in the middle of teaching when the school secretary appeared at my classroom door, her face pale. "Ms. Hartwell," the hospital called. "You need to go." Now, I made it there in 12 minutes, breaking every speed limit. They'd stabilized him, but barely. His small body looked even smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and kept him tethered to life by increasingly fragile threads. Dr. Reeves met me in the hallway. "I'm sorry, Bryn. We're running out of time." I sat beside Noah's bed that night and made a decision. I stopped fighting the phone calls, the billing department, the endless administrative maze that led nowhere. I wasn't going to spend my son's final days begging people who'd already made it clear they didn't care. Instead, I stayed with him. I read him his favorite books about space and dinosaurs. I smuggled in McDonald's French fries even though the nurses technically didn't allow outside food. I told him jokes and stories and promised him that he wouldn't be alone. Not for a single moment. The next morning, Sophie called. "Mom said you've been distant," she said. "I know things are hard, but this is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. You'll feel better once the wedding's over." I almost laughed. "You're probably right. She took it as agreement. 3 days later, Noah woke up scared. His eyes found mine in the dim hospital room light, wide and searching. "Mom," he whispered, "am I dying?" Every instinct I had screamed at me to lie to protect him, to tell him everything would be fine. But I'd spent months lying to myself, and I was tired of it. He deserved the truth, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever have to give him. "Yeah, baby," I said, my voice breaking. "You're really sick, but I'm going to be right here with you the whole time." He looked at me for a long moment, his small hand squeezing mine. "It's okay, Mom," he said finally. "You're brave." Those words shattered something in me that had been holding together through sheer force of will. Because the truth was, I didn't feel brave. I felt like I'd failed him in every way that mattered. The next morning, he was gone. No alarms, no dramatic crash, no medical team rushing in. His heart simply stopped like a clock running out of time. I sat there holding his hand, feeling the warmth slowly fade from his fingers, and I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't process that the child who'd believed in dinosaurs and rocket ships and mothers who could fix anything was simply gone. When I finally found my voice, I called my mother. "He's gone," I said. "Oh, Bryn." Her voice trembled. "Oh no. What terrible timing." Timing. That was the word she chose. Because Noah's funeral would interfere with Sophie's wedding schedule. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just said, "Yeah, terrible timing," and hung up. The funeral was small. 20 people, most of them co-workers and a handful of my old army friends who'd driven hours to be there. My Aunt Alice came the only family member who'd sent money when I'd asked. She hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. My parents arrived 40 minutes late. My mother wore beige, as if she'd chosen the colour most likely to avoid making a statement. My father checked his watch twice. They stayed for the service but left before the reception, saying they had somewhere they needed to be. After everyone left, I sat alone by the graveside until the cemetery worker started stacking chairs. The November air was cold and the sky had that indecisive colour between grey and blue that never commits to anything. "I'm sorry, Noah," I whispered to the fresh earth. Not because I failed, I did everything I could, but because the people who were supposed to love you didn't even try. That night, I came home to an apartment that felt wrong without him in it. His toys were still arranged where he'd left them. His sneakers sat by the door. The dinosaur pajamas he'd worn 100 times were folded on his bed, waiting for a child who would never come home. I poured myself a drink I didn't finish. Then I opened a notebook and started writing everything down: dates, amounts, conversations. The exact words my parents had used. Not out of rage, but out of habit. The army had taught me to document everything, to create a record that couldn't be disputed or rewritten. When I was done, I closed the notebook and stared at the wall. Somewhere across the state, my family was probably celebrating, taking photos under crystal chandeliers, toasting to love and family values, while I sat alone in the dark. I whispered into the silence, "Enjoy it while it lasts." Then I turned off the light. The next morning, I got up at 6 out of habit, my body still running on the schedule of a mother who no longer had a child to care for. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt wrong, suffocating. I made coffee and poured 2 cups before remembering. Then I stood there staring at the second cup until it went cold. And I poured it down the drain with shaking hands. The school had held my position. My principal, Mr. Herrera, told me to take another month if I needed it, his voice gentle in the way people speak around fresh grief. "I need structure," I told him. "I need something to do with my days that isn't just this." He didn't argue. So I went back to teaching. I stood in front of 30 middle schoolers and explained cellular respiration, while my own cells still remembered how to breathe for my son. The kids looked at me with that awkward mixture of pity and fear that children have around grief, like it might be contagious. Like if they get too close, they might catch the sadness and take it home. I kept my face calm, my voice steady. Soldiers learn to compartmentalize, to lock away the things that would break them if they let them out. So I taught. I graded papers. I stayed late at school because going home meant facing the silence. I packed Noah's things into boxes and labeled them by category: clothes, toys, books, art projects. I told myself I was organizing, being practical. In reality, I was trying to make the world smaller, manageable, survivable. My parents called twice in the 6 months after Noah died. Both times my mother talked about Sophie and Derek's honeymoon in the Maldives, the new house they'd bought with my parents' help, and how excited they were about the pregnancy. "We're going to be grandparents," my mother said, her voice bright with joy. "Our first grandchild, Sophia, is due in June." Our first grandchild. I held the phone away from my ear and stared at it like it had transformed into something venomous. "Mom," I said slowly. "Noah was your grandchild?" "Well, yes, of course, sweetheart. But this is different. This is a healthy baby. A fresh start for all of us." I hung up. That night, I opened Facebook and saw my mother's post, "Our hearts are full. Our first grandchild on the way. So blessed." There were photos of Sophie glowing, hands on her belly. Comments from friends congratulating them. Not a single mention of Noah. Not a photo. Not even an acknowledgement that he had existed. I took a screenshot and saved it in a file I'd labeled Operation Ledger. I didn't know why I was collecting these pieces of evidence. I just knew that someday it would matter. Someday, the record would tell the story that my family was trying to erase. Over the next 3 years, I added to that file every email where they mentioned Sophie's children but never Noah. Every Facebook post celebrating milestones that he would never reach. News articles about my father's company winning government contracts with quotes about integrity and family values. I highlighted those words and filed them away. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life in small increments. I took night classes to finish my master's in education leadership, studying between dinner and the white noise of the television I left on to fill the silence. In 2019, I was promoted to assistant principal. The pay was modest, but it was progress proof that I was still moving forward even though part of me had died with Noah. I bought a used Jeep that didn't stall in Colorado winters. I joined a veterans support group, mostly because I missed the order and structure of military life. The other veterans didn't talk much about feelings, they weren't that kind of group, but they showed up when you needed help moving furniture, or just wanted to sit with someone who understood what it meant to lose something you couldn't get back. One night after a meeting, I sat with one of them, Sergeant Leah Collins, who'd done field logistics in Afghanistan. She asked why I'd been so quiet lately. I told her enough to give shape to the story without bleeding all over the table. "You ever going to talk to them again?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good," she replied, raising her beer. "Some people earn distance." We clinked bottles, and that was that. By the time Sophie had her second child, I'd stopped checking their social media deliberately. But my mother still sent holiday cards with family photos, and I kept every one of them, tucked into the back of the ledger. In one, my father held a baby boy with the caption, "Our little miracle Jackson." They'd used the same caption I'd once written for Noah's first birthday post. They'd stolen even that. I started a small charity fund in Noah's name, the Noah Hartwell Honor Fund. It was modest. Just me and a few veterans raising money for children of service members with serious illnesses. We didn't raise much, but every dollar we gave out felt like pushing back against something dark and cruel. By the 4th year, I had enough in savings to breathe again. Not wealth, but stability. Every month, I transferred a set amount into a separate account labeled Future Operations. I didn't tell anyone what it was for, but I knew. Justice delayed is still justice. The hardest part wasn't the anger. Anger eventually dulls itself through repetition. The hardest part was the grief that stopped screaming and started whispering. Some nights I'd sit on the floor by the closet and open the box that held Noah's things. His worn sneakers, his dinosaur pajamas, the crayon drawing of the two of us standing under a crooked sun. I'd trace my fingers over his wobbly handwriting and imagine his small hand pressing down on the paper. Then I'd close the box and sit there until I remembered how to breathe. That was my life work, routine, quiet, documentation. I told myself it wasn't revenge I was planning. It was just record keeping. Justice doesn't always announce itself with sirens. Sometimes it arrives with a paper trail. Then one spring afternoon, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No return address, just my name in handwriting I recognized Aunt Alice. The note inside was brief. "Bryn, I thought you should know. Gregory's company is in trouble. There's a fraud investigation. Stocks are crashing. Your parents haven't said anything publicly, but it's bad. Please don't tell them I told you." I read it twice, then smiled. Not from joy, but from recognition, like gravity had finally shifted in my favor. That night, I looked up the news myself. Monroe Developments had been caught in a government contract scandal involving falsified invoices and misappropriated funds. My father wasn't criminally charged, but his name appeared in every article. The company's stock had plummeted. The board had resigned. Retirement accounts had evaporated. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, exhaling fully for the first time in years. It wasn't joy I felt. It was a cold, clarifying recognition. Like the universe had finally checked its notes and realized it owed me a receipt. 2 weeks later, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was different, smaller, thinner, stripped of the performative brightness I'd known all my life. Bryn, please call us. It's important. I didn't call back. Then another message a few days later. Your father lost his position. We're struggling. The bank is threatening foreclosure. Struggling. The words sounded almost poetic coming from her. I let it go another week. Then I checked the county foreclosure listings out of simple curiosity. Their house, the mansion with marble counters and magazine cover landscaping, was on the list. Auction scheduled in 45 days. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone to share the news. I just watched that listing the way I used to watch Noah's heart monitor, counting down the numbers with clinical detachment. Then one Monday evening, I came home to find someone standing at my door. Grey hair, worn suit, face I'd memorized in both love and bitter disappointment. My father. He looked diminished somehow, as if failure had physically shrunk him. I opened the door only as wide as the chain lock allowed. What do you want, Bryn? His voice cracked. Please, we need to talk. About what? He swallowed hard, and I watched his Adam's apple bob with the effort. We're losing everything. The house, the savings. Your mother hasn't been well. We need help. I stared at him through the crack in the door. Help. That's an interesting word. Can I come in? No, I said. But I'll think about it. I closed the door before he could respond. For the first time in 4 years, I slept through the night without nightmares. The next time I saw my father cry, he was sitting in a borrowed Toyota outside my apartment building. It was raining not dramatically, just enough to blur the windows and make the world look honest for once. He rolled the window down halfway when I approached. Your mother's in the car. She didn't want to come up. She never does, I said. He held out a folded letter with shaking hands. They froze our accounts. The company's gone. They're investigating me personally. We might lose the house. I glanced at the paper, not because I cared about its contents, but because I wanted to see his signature under something he couldn't control for once. So, I said, so we thought you should know. You're still our daughter. I looked at him like I was trying to remember what that word used to mean before it became a weapon. Am I? Or am I just a last resort in your crisis management plan? He didn't answer. My father had never been good with silence unless he was the one wielding it. Your mother's been unwell, he said finally. The stress, the media attention, she's been taking medication. She keeps saying we deserve this. And do you? I asked. He flinched. We made mistakes, Bryn, but we're still family. Family, I repeated. You keep using that word? I don't think it means what you think it means. I walked away before he could find another plea to try. They didn't contact me again for 2 weeks. In that time, I watched the news coverage of their scandal unfold with the detached interest of someone watching a documentary about people they used to know. The local paper ran a feature local construction magnates face civil suits following fraud allegations. Their photos looked like mugshots, even though they hadn't been arrested, just exposed. When my mother finally called, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won, Bryn. Her voice was barely a whisper. We need your help. The house, we're going to lose it. We just need to get through this month. Please. I played the message twice before saving it to my computer. That evening, I invited them to meet me. Not at my apartment, but at a coffee shop downtown, public and neutral. They arrived looking like refugees from their own life, my mother in a coat that had once been expensive, but now just looked old. My father in a cheap suit that didn't fit right. We sat at a corner table. I'd brought a folder. Before we talk about your situation, I said, opening the folder, I want to go over something. I pulled out the first document, a screenshot of the GoFundMe page I'd created for Noah, dated 4 years ago. Remember this? The day I asked for help online because my family said no? My mother looked down. Bryn, we've said we're sorry. Sorry is what you say when you spill coffee, I interrupted. What you did requires a different word. Let's try unforgivable. My father straightened his back, trying to summon authority he no longer had. We made the best decision we could at the time. The best decision, I said. I slid another paper across the table. Sophie's wedding invoice, $320,842.50. Signed by you. He stared at it like it was evidence in a trial, which, in a sense, it was. That's almost 5 times what Noah needed, I continued. 5 times. So tell me, was the imported champagne worth it? The designer cake? The swan eye sculpture? It wasn't about the money, my mother said weakly. Then what was it about? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it was exactly about the money. You had it for one grandchild and not for the other. I pulled out another document, the photo my mother had posted on Facebook. Our first grandchild on the way. So blessed. You erased him, I said quietly. Noah existed, and you deleted him from your family story like he was a mistake in the narrative. My mother began to cry. My father closed his eyes. We were wrong, he said finally. Be specific, I said. He took a breath. We chose Sophie's wedding over Noah's surgery. The words hung in the air like a confession that had been 4 years in the making. Say it again, I said. We spent money on a wedding when we could have saved your son, he said, his voice breaking. I nodded slowly. There it is. I pulled out a check I'd already written. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you $90,000. Not as a gift, as a transaction. In exchange, you're going to sign this document. I slid 2 sheets of paper across the table. The top one read, No contact agreement, permanent estrangement clause. My father scanned it, his hands trembling. You're disowning us? No, I said. I'm setting boundaries. You wanted a business arrangement. This is it. You get to keep your house. I get to keep my peace. We never speak again. Bryn, my mother whispered, this is cruel. Cruel is letting your grandson die while you paid for ice sculptures, I said. This is proportional. They sat there for a long time, the weight of their choices finally landing on them in a way that money couldn't cushion. Finally, my father picked up the pen. They both signed. I took the documents, placed them in a folder, and handed them the check. Now we're even. What do you get out of this? My mother asked, tears streaming down her face. Peace, I said. The kind that doesn't require your approval. I stood up, left them sitting there, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just this, the truth, finally spoken, and a boundary that couldn't be crossed again. That night, I opened Operation Ledger one last time and wrote the final entry, statement secured. Confession verified. Contract signed. Status resolved. Then I closed the folder, put it in the filing cabinet, and didn't look back. The world hadn't given me closure, so I'd built it myself piece by piece, word by word, truth by truth. And it was enough.